Hey, this is Lindsay. I have a 2019 KTM 350 SXF project behind me. It belongs to my good friend, the man behind the camera, Joe Carlino, who I've worked with the last 6 years on pretty much all my bike tests. He's your 30 plus, just typical novice, likes to ride Mammoth, likes to race local races, not a big fan of 450s, always had nice built 250s, and we finally got him to make the jump to the 350. We also enlisted Willie Simons Jr., local 21-year-old pro here out of California, to ride today as I was busy on another bike, but I've spent a lot of time helping Joe develop this bike the last couple months. And really, it's just a great project to show guys that are on the fence about what they really should be riding, just really how fun a 350 can be. Finally went out, tried one, went in, picked it up, and then went about still trying to tailor it to his exact needs. He's been on KTMs long enough to know exactly what he wanted. And some of the goals with this, coming from the 18 chassis 250 to the 19 350, he really wanted to try to, per se, just take a little bit more comfort, take the edge off of quite a few things. The 19 chassis changed a bit, most up in the head stay, there's a little more rigidity up there. So certain things like the egg-strict triple clamps with PHDS bar mounts. It's played with all the torque settings on some of the engine mounts, swing arm pivots, and just a lot of work on the suspension. Always has had like cone valve forks and track shocks. We went through, this is actually the latest batch from WP, it just came out. So updated cone valve fork, and then the track shock, now dubbed the Super Tracks, is on this bike, so it was our first experience playing with that. So we spent the last couple days dialing in that suspension. The fork itself went off to Enzo Racing. They've done the last couple settings for him, and we were able to dial it in kind of based off that information, but change a few things. The new fork's longer, has a different design of spring tube. The cone valves inside have actually been switched out for a more traditional mid-speed valve like that's found in a KYV or Showa fork. We knew we had a real supple initial setting that Joe liked for that setup, and we played a lot with that oil height. The standard new cone valve fork asked for 450 millimeters. We dropped that down to 420 because it was a little too progressive the first time we tried it, changed the spring rates. Here's the biggest question. Why are we taking apart kit suspension? I say this all the time, kit suspension is amazing for a componentry level. If you get to take one apart, whether it is WP, Showa, KYB, etc., the components are better at that level. There are certain things where it's coating, hard parts, different diameters of pistons and cartridges, etc., that allow, further damping characteristic stuff that we're looking for. It doesn't mean that they're perfect out of the box. They're still designed with a base setting to suit a mass amount of riders. And I will say, like, a set of kit suspension base is typically quite a bit better than a base motocross setting because they're targeting more of a performance-oriented crowd. But still, realistically, a base setting in a set of kit suspension to me is usually worse than a tailored setting in production components. But if you tailor the kit suspension for you, you get the best of both worlds. So that's what we really did with this stuff. Super track shock is interesting because the track system is now different. You can hit the description below. I did a video actually explaining that, so I won't get too far into what makes the system different. But same thing, getting to play with the new adjustability of the Super Track shock, the high speed, the low speed compression, the standard rebound gave us a lot of options just to tune and tweak the shock and get it perfectly dialed in. Looking for a bike that was still balanced, but has a lot more of a supple feel than what the production components had, while still having the ramp up and bottoming resistance needed for Joe's skill, even if I jump on it, and the person you see in this video today, Willie Simons, riding the bike. As for the engine, for the most part, it is bone stock internally. 350 has plenty of power coming off of some of the heavily modified 250s that we built for Joe in the past, but there was a few goals we went about. The Hinson clutch in it is an optional basket piece that actually has rubber dampers. It makes the on-off feeling of the clutch not quite as harsh and doesn't make it as hard on the engine. It has a little bit different clutch feel that we prefer on this setup. And then all the mapping has been done by Jamie Ellis at Twisted Development. It's got a Vortex box on it. And really what that allows you to do more than just reflashing the stock boxes. Yeah, stock box, you have some parameters to play with somebody that has that program. But with the Vortex, we were able to build a setting that's very crisp initially. It has better air to fuel ratio throughout the range, so we've increased and broadened the power. But a big one is to make this 350 feel so easy to ride. Even though the inertia is already very low on this engine compared to a 450, we've done a lot with the mapping to free up the engine on D-cell, to let it roll into the corner easier and make the 350 feel even more like a 250 while still having all that power and in a much more reliable and easy to maintain package. couple other things like the P3 carbon skid plate, they made it purposely quite a bit thinner to reduce any extra rigidity they would add to the chassis. It has a CRF axle with Yoshimura axle blocks in the rear, so it doesn't have the one locked inside like the KTM normally has. That kind of frees up how the rear feels overall. Like I said, just another item towards freeing up and adding more comfort to the chassis. And then the last one, Yoshimura exhaust. They're really good at not building an exhaust that's so radically different that it messes up air to fuel ratios. It's very easy to map. They actually hooked us up with a bung unit on the head pipe here so we could go further with the mapping with the Vortex. And it's just a really clean system. Adds a little bit to the bottom, a little bit to the top, just helped us broaden out that range. The gearing has actually been swapped from the standard 1450 to a 1452, able to run a much higher gear in a lot of places on the track. With all the other additional items that were added, we broadened out the power enough that we could also bring in the gearing a little bit tighter. While the suspension, of course, is a big ticket item, everything else on this bike is overall pretty minor. All specific items to make the chassis more comfortable, easier to ride, to broaden out the power and make the power more usable in all sections. And honestly, between myself, the guy behind the camera, and Willie that rode today, we all love this bike. It really proves the point that probably 99% of the dudes riding a 450 at their local track don't need it. This is a easier to ride bike I can go just as fast on. And honestly, there are things you can do on this bike that you can't do on a 450, but at the same time, it's not the rev out fest that the 250F is. It really is that perfect in the middle toy. And if you've ever really been considering a 350, look at some of the stuff we did here as inspiration. You can really take one pretty far and have a great time with it.